Dear class, welcome back to American National Government. We are talking about John Locke today. Let's see. So the topics, basically we'll talk about John Locke's writings, but we're also interested in the consequences of his ideas in American society. Who was Locke? So Locke is an English philosopher. He was in England during 1632 and 1708. He experienced the English Civil Wars and wrote two books on government. One is the first treatise, and the second one is the second treatise. The first treatise is not something we covered in the readings for this week. However, you need to know a little bit. In this book, Locke becomes a champion for human rights. He argues that individuals have rights. Kings may not give us those rights, but people have rights. He also refutes the divine rights of kings. And he's arguing with a bunch of intellectuals of his time, such as Robert Filmer, who has claimed that we are all slaves and that parents don't have rights over children and that kings have rights. Others discussed in his first treatise are Jean Bodin, who is a French philosopher, who is critical of the popes and lives through the Protestant Reformation. And Filmer supports the power of kings. At this time, remember that Hobbes was born before Locke, and he also defends the rights of kings because he says civil war would not have happened if the people had just obeyed the kings, right? The civil wars in England. And look at the devastation. Was it worth it? Locke's critique is essentially critiquing Bodin and saying that kings are actually selfish, they are above the law, they are petty. In the second treatise, Locke does a complete 180 on us. It proposes a new kind of social contract, the second treatise, in which private property is the reason for government. In this, he includes life, liberty as well, because that's how he starts his first treatise, right? He says, well, life and liberty are important, individuals have it, but the kings don't recognize this. And in the second treatise, he says, but really, government, the only use of government is to protect property. He views life and liberty to be intrinsic human rights, or what he calls natural rights. Men wish to preserve their natural rights, which were given to them by God, and thus push back on slavery. Any kind of enslavement is wrong. This is his main argument in book 1, or rather the first treatise. And then he argues that kings should protect these natural rights of man as well, and hopes that his own king, King William, will respect the rights. The use of reason. So for Locke, he says when there's no government, when there is a state of nature or just a society of people with no government, men use reason to survive. They don't attack others in fear of being attacked. They observe the rules of their society without having a government. However, at any moment, there is the threat of war. What if a person does not use reason? What if they attack someone and this leads to violence and chaos? Thus, the state of nature, that is the situation without any government, is not ideal for Locke. During peaceful times, men try to be productive. They might grow food, graze livestock, fish, manufacture goods and services, but war ends all of this. And hence, a government is needed to protect the livelihood, the property, and the liberty of man. So that's his argument for government. However, Locke, you know, sounds super duper nice. And then suddenly in chapters 5 and 7, his ideas start to crumble. Locke proposes that the goal of society should be to maximize wealth. This only happens when you can make a profit. And this happens when you pay labor the least. Basically, he's saying minimize your cost and then you'll maximize your profits. And if you save that, reinvest that in your business, you will eventually have more profits and more profits and more profits, right? And that should be the goal of society. Hence, slavery was appealing to him. He argues that ordinarily humans should not be subjected to slavery, but if they were in a war and were vanquished, meaning they lost, they could become prisoners and could be enslaved and used to work. Slave trader. Locke was very controversial. He became an ardent defender of people's rights to life, liberty, and property in the first and second treaties, but in the second treatise, then turns around and argues that slavery is okay. He also made money as a slave trader. His argument to use slaves to minimize cost and maximize profits, and thus wealth accumulation, is the cornerstone of early capitalism in the US, such as in the South. Where you had slavery as an institution. But look at the larger consequences. We have slavery and people are surviving, or rather, they are dealing with the consequences of slavery. But we also see the same kind of logic being used in the prison industrial complex today, right? Once people were in prison, they could be forced to work, whether inside the prison or outside the prison. Interestingly, the US Federal Prisons Incorporated was using prison labor for corporations like Nike. Many brand names are produced in prisons. Labor costs are low. The pay is between 0.25 cents or rather 25 cents, not 0.25, and $1.15 per hour. So you cannot say that all the jobs are being taken by undocumented immigrants, right? Which has been the critique of the Trump administration and other very ridiculous Republican administrations that are critical of people coming through the border and completely ignore that exploitation is happening. They they completely ignore that. Okay. So I'm going to stop here. The rest of this slide goes into, the quotations and other things used in Locke. So I'll stop here for now. And I do want you to read the book, the chapters that are assigned, because I want you to be convinced. Don't just agree. So read the second treatise, be convinced of what I'm saying here. Let's stop here for now, and I'll see you in the next lecture.